This is where I have my internal feelings of regret, because I know that so many other people have started out in life with less than me, have started out in harder circumstances and have done more. And so when people ask me like, hey, what's your motivation to keep on doing stuff? It's have I really done the most with the gifts I've been given? And Ed Milet has this great little story that he teaches on stage where, he believes that when Ed Milet dies and he goes to heaven, he's going to meet God's going to bring out like, this was the best version of Ed Milet that you could have been.
Craig, I think it's really important that we talk about what discipline is, because it seems to have become one of those words that gets tossed around so much that it's deflated and it loses some of its meaning.
Absolutely. So I've come down to this very simple definition. It is simply this. Discipline is putting a level 10 effort into your level 10 problem. And if you're not doing that, you're just not as disciplined as you can be. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are chasing what I call perverse forms of procrastination. They're doing a lot of good things that are getting in the way of the great things and getting in the way of them actually being disciplined and putting that level 10 effort into their level 10 problem.
So I guess that's the level 10 idea is interesting. When we start talking about those levels, I think sometimes that's obviously subjective, right? Your
Totally.
level 10 might be different, or my level 10 in a year could actually be my level 7. If ideally it should be, right? Like, because I'm getting better at improving.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But how do you know if you're pursuing a level 10 problem? Because I know that there's a lot of men out there who are lacking purpose and direction in their lives, and they feel like there's something more, but they don't really know what they should be pursuing, or if what they're pursuing is something worth pursuing.
Yeah, let me give you a little background on this, whole idea of the level 10 thing. And so, Bedros Koulian is a good friend of yours, good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And for years, he ran this thing called Fitness Business Summit. And Fitness Business Summit is this event where personal trainers would come in and gym owners would come in to learn about sales and marketing. And I would look out in the audience, because I spoke at it every single year. I'd look out and there's James and Jenny and Johnny. They're out in row 10, same seats as last year. And this year, they're 8% body fat. They're really ripped, and they have $8 in their bank account. And they would come to the event, and we would teach them all this sales and marketing. And then they would go home, and what would they do? They wouldn't do anything with it. Instead, they would take all the information they got from all the other personal trainers there about making their workouts better. And so they'd come back the next year and they'd be 7% body fat, and they'd have $7 in their bank account. And this is just an extreme example of them going home and putting a level 10 effort into a level 1 problem, which is their body fat, their fitness. And a lot of men listening to this are out there already really jacked, already really fit. And you're putting a lot, you're doing your 2-a-day workouts and you're rucking and you're doing all this stuff. But are you having the difficult conversations with your business partner or your team members or your spouse? Are those molehills in the most important areas of life becoming mountains because you're too darn busy putting a level 10 effort into getting, 1% lost body fat when you already got veins, coming out, of your arms and your shirt. And so it's just this mismatch. And you're not a bad person because of this. You're simply what I call a wild horse. We use that phrase in the book. I'm a wild horse. You're a wild horse. It's good to be a wild horse. You're ambitious. You want to be it all. You want to have it all. You want to have all the vacations. You want to have great, trucks and cars and a home gym. And you want to have a great marriage. And you want to have awesome kids. And you want to raise them. And you want to have freedom. And you want to be wealthy if you're an entrepreneur. You want to have it all. But when you want to have it all, if you're a wild horse, you're just off running around in all these directions. And I feel like because of this thing, the phone, that our ability to be reactive, or our opportunity to be reactive to all these things that pop up, there's this challenge, there's the ice baths, there's the ultra marathons, because if you just run marathons these days, you don't even run, man. You got to run an ultra marathon. And then, the ultra marathoners get looked down on by the Badwater ultra marathoners. And, it's just all this, peeing contest of who's the most insanely hardcore, physical challenge person. But that's not really what discipline truly is. To me, discipline is knowing what really matters in your life, and then putting the blinders on and pursuing only what really matters to you, to your core values inside of your heart, inside of your vision. So to figure that out, We have to do the hardest thing of all, which most people won't do these days. And most people have never done this in history because it is so hard, and that's thinking. And it's even harder in this day and age with all the great podcasts and all the great audiobooks out there to always have inputs going into your head. You're always gathering more information. You're always hearing about new challenges. You're always getting new opportunities. But what you need to do is you need to stop the inputs. You need to step back. You need to spend some time in silence and figure out, all right, what really matters to me? Where do I want to be in the next 3 to 5 years in my business, with my family? Where do I want to be living? What do I want to have accomplished? What really matters? What is my specific definition of success? Not what is Joe Rogan's specific definition of success, or this guy's specific definition of success, or, what I saw from some guy I've never seen before on the internet. What's his specific definition of success? What is it to me? What really matters to me? And when you have spent some time in that self-reflection and introspection, you get the correct orientation. And this is what's missing from a lot of people's lives is not that it's not that they don't have discipline. It's not that they don't have ambition. It's not that you're not willing to work hard. It's just that you're going in the wrong direction because you haven't stepped back and figured out which direction is right for me. And when you do that, when you finally figure that out, then all of your efforts go in the right direction and you accomplish more. But it all starts with that right orientation. And so we take people through a little vision exercise to figure out what matters for their life, where they want to be, talking about big why and core values for their family and for their business. And then also just that phrase, what is your specific definition of success for the short term? So we know what matters to you. And then we get you running your own race, even if it's in the other direction than what everybody else is going.
Yeah, I think that's, one thing, as you were saying that, one of the things that I've seen is when we help our men with their goal planning, one of the areas that we focus on is calibration. And so that's getting right with yourself, your mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, or maybe it's condition, and that's your physical health. And I'm using obviously a silly example, but if somebody says to me, I'm really working on my self-development, so I'm going to read a book a month. And then I ask him and I say, okay, that's great. A book a month. How many are you currently reading? Well, yeah, I read a book a month right now. It's like, okay, well, you're already doing that. So that's not really a goal. It's the same thing as your fitness guys where they're like, yeah, I really want to get fit and shredded and I want to work out as hard as I can. And you ask them, hey, what are you doing right now? They're like, I'm getting fit and shredded and working out as hard as I can. It's like, well, good. You're already doing it. So maybe there's something else that you can pursue that is more meaningful, because it's like brushing your teeth. I would never make a goal in my life to brush my teeth daily, because I hope most of us listening to this podcast are just already doing that. But push yourself outside of your comfort zone and give yourself something to do that you've never done before or that you're hiding from. That's what I found a lot. A lot of people know what they should be doing, but they hide from it.
Yeah, and that's the level 10 problem, is that when people say, well, how do I figure out what my level 10 problem is? It's like, what your level 10 problem is. It's a thing that you dream about, that you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go, oh my God, I don't want to dream about that anymore. Or you wake up in the morning and it's cloudy outside, so you immediately get in a slightly bad mood, and all of a sudden your mind turns to that thing. And oftentimes it is actually a difficult discussion. And the difficult discussions in our lives really need to be with, if we own a business, it's either a business partner or a team member, where things are, they started going sour about 6 months ago. We push it off, and oh man. Or, in your relationships, it's something that is festering between you and your wife. And you need to sit down and have this really hard conversation. But gosh, hard conversations suck. People, I joke about this on Instagram, and people always like this one, is like, people will go and do the most incredibly difficult things in order to avoid a hard conversation. Like, you will CrossFit 7 days a week, you will work out twice a day, you will do ultra marathons, you will cold plunge, all to avoid having a difficult conversation with somebody, because it is so hard for us. And listen, I've ran from difficult conversations in the past, and it sucked. In fact, we have a coaching program for business owners, and we actually built out a 2-page worksheet to help somebody have a difficult conversation, because we see this all the time. And it's like, put yourself in their shoes. What do you think is going to be their worst reaction? What happens if you get their worst reaction? What happens if you get their best reaction? How can you reframe this problem in their mind so that it's not really a problem, that's an opportunity? How can you take we have people start by saying, I take full responsibility for the situation and how it's gotten to this point, and so that we bring down their defenses, because everybody is just really, really not everybody, most people are really fearful of the difficult conversation. But if you think about where most people's problems in life come from, it's because they've avoided this. And if they just would have had that conversation 6 months ago, yeah, it would have sucked, but you would have ripped the bandage off. And now all of a sudden, you're not talking about ripping the bandage off. You're talking about divorce lawyer and some real hard conversations, all because you didn't have that one 6 months ago. And so we just want people to attack that head on. And then you can make time for all the other stuff that you want to do as a wild horse, like, the CrossFit and all that stuff. But, make sure that you're taking the time to focus on what matters.
Right. I think I heard Jordan Peterson, I think it was Jordan Peterson, say something like the answer. I'm paraphrasing, but the answer you seek is in the place you're afraid to look or unwilling to look,
Campbell,
or something like that.
Yeah, it's a Joseph
is
Campbell.
It? Okay.
Yeah,
the hero's
journey.
Got it.
The answers you seek are in the cave that you fear to go in, or something. It's something,
right, something like
paraphrasing like that. And it is true. It's like when I think like of in the past of areas where I wanted to improve on, because I used to have really introverted tendencies, and but I also wanted to be the speaker, and they're kind of incongruent, because you can go up there and speak, but people want to talk to you after. And if you like rush out of there, people are like, oh, what's going on with this guy? And they're not going to want to see you speak again. And so I had to really lean into that. And, one of those events that Bedros had, the Fitness Business Summit, I went to it and I made this public declaration. I'm going to hug 100 people at this event. And like some people listen to hug 100 people at a big event. That's no big deal. I do that all the time. But for me, as an introverted type of person, it was very difficult. And I did it, and I got a lot of weird looks from people who had known me for a long time. But that was the cave I feared to enter. But I had to do it, and it helped. That was years ago, and now social settings are so much easier for me because I kept on doing those types of things.
It is interesting, though, because when we look in that cave that we've been unwilling to look, it looks a lot scarier than it actually is.
Oh, yeah.
And when you get in there, I've realized, I actually went on a hike yesterday, and there was a bit of a cave, and I was looking in there with my phone because I didn't have a flashlight. It was a lava tube. And we're looking in there, and I've got my flashlight. I'm like, I don't know if I want to go in there. I'm like, nah, I do want to go in there. You go in there, and it's amazing. It opens up, and it's got this like really cool view, and it kind of opened up on top, but I would have never been able to see that if I just stayed on the outside and just looked at it from where I was in relative safety, or at least perceived safety. But you get in there and you realize, oh, there are so many incredible blessings in here that I would have missed if I didn't have the courage to step into it.
Yeah, I'll just tell a quick story about this embarrassing story. I went to South Africa on a safari in 2018 with a bunch of friends that are friends with Bedros, and we went to this place in Zimbabwe called Victoria Falls, and you can jump off. It's not a bungee; it's a swing where you jump off and you do 275 feet down, and then it swings you out over this canyon. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it at all. I wasn't even entertaining it, and all my friends did it. And at the end, I was like, why didn't I do it? Like, what's stupid? I regret this. And I was thinking about it for like the next 12 hours. And then luckily the kids my friend's kids wanted to go back because there was a zip line beside it and they wanted to do it again. I was like, okay, I'm going to go and do it. And I'm a big fan of Tim Grover's book, Relentless. And in it, he just says, don't think, just stop, stop thinking. And so I was just like, I thought quickly, and I said, listen, people do this all the time. I'm just going to go up. And they put the harness on me. I just walked up to the edge. I didn't think, and I jumped. And it was a great experience. And I actually truly believe that it was then helpful for me to enter another cave, because I was single up until 2019. I didn't want to be single. And so, I pushed off relationships for all types of reasons. And then I just decided to I got to put my ego aside and ask for help. So I asked a bunch of my female friends who have large social networks to introduce me to somebody. And sure enough, long story short, one of them became my wife. And now we have 3 kids today. All because, was it because I jumped off that cliff in Zimbabwe? Maybe I would have done the other thing too, but it really did help. And so every time you push yourself to do that thing, whether it's, you're a bodybuilder and you go and run a marathon like Bedros did, 15 years ago. Like, he learned a lot from that, and he still talks about it today, but it was something that he didn't want to do. I don't know if you ever heard his story, like the first week of marathon training, he ran in Chuck Taylor Converse.
Oh, he did. Oh,
And he didn't know why he was getting shin splints.
Brutal.
220-pound dude running in chucks on pavement.
What do they call him? Over that weight, I think they're called Clydesdales, right? At that point.
Man,
but yeah,
that guy is so funny. But he was always about these 6-week challenges, about trying something new. And if you can listen, you can be jacked and you can read a book a week and you can kind of do the same things over and over again. But the real growth comes from, when you put yourself in those beginner shoes and you're willing to set the ego aside and be humble and go into those caves, literally for you, metaphorically for me, and you're going to come out better on the other side.
Yeah. You talk a lot about, you dedicated a whole section in the book, The Dark Side of Discipline, to the concept and idea of suffering. And we were talking earlier about, how people suffer when they're not willing to have these challenging conversations, or they're not willing to address some scary obstacle in a meaningful way. Is that the suffering that you're talking about? Or is there suffering in just the monotony and grind of the modern day version of discipline that we hear about?
I think there is suffering in what I describe as suffering is when you miss out on something, when you have a regret, when you lose something, when you underperform. To me, my suffering, whenever I feel really bad, and I do feel bad from time to time, is when I know that I could have done this level, like I could have performed at X level, and I underperformed. And I underperformed because I was either underprepared, I just didn't give it my all. For whatever reason it was, or, I fell back on bad habits. And, it could be in a conversation with my wife, it could be in a workout or something like that. But every time I feel something negative inside of me, it is because I underperformed. And now that's in the past, right? And we don't want to dwell in the past, but I have to suffer about that thing, like that underperformance. Like I can't do anything about it. And to me, that's suffering. And so sacrifice is different. Like we sacrifice in our workouts, we sacrifice for our families, we sacrifice, getting up early and doing what we have to do for our wife and kids. That's sacrifice. But I believe there's joy in sacrifice. Like when you go in and you go through a hard workout, it's not suffering to me. Even though some people might think it's suffering, but I don't think it's suffering. I think there's sacrifice. And I think there's joy in it. Like there is joy in hard work. But suffering is when you regret it. And living a life of regrets. I'm not an expert in this area, and maybe I shouldn't speak about it. But I see a lot of women suffering who hit 35, 40, 45 years old with no kids because they have made a decision to, chase their careers. And I think that is a type of suffering which is so sad. And we see it. My wife and I see it all the time in people. Because they, were sold, an idea that, they shouldn't have bought into, and they bought into it, and now they're stuck because maybe they found the guy and they can't have the kid, and that is suffering. That is suffering. And so I want, and men can have their own version of it. Like I lead off the book with about a friend of mine who chased discipline activities. And his wife walked out on him with the kids because he was spending all his time doing that, and he didn't put his level 10 effort into his marriage. Like that story made me write the book because that is suffering. And, I'm sure there's guys out here who have made a mistake in the past. And listen, I'm not perfect either. And we all make mistakes. And unfortunately, some men are suffering because they don't get to see their kids as much. That's suffering, right? Doing a hard workout is not suffering, it's sacrifice. But missing out on what you love, having regrets is suffering. And if you figure out what you really want and you put that level 10 effort into it, you at least give yourself the greatest chance of not having to suffer through regret.
I can appreciate the distinction between sacrifice and suffering because I have heard people often talk about what you dub sacrifice as suffering. And I can't help but think that if you feel like you're going to suffer doing something, you're going to be less likely to do it. So the workouts are a great example. If people constantly tell you how horrible this is going to be and how hard it's going to be and it's going to suck and embrace the suck and embrace the suffering, it's like, I don't want to do that. And I actually don't feel that way when I go train because, it's hard. I sweat. There's things I have to get through. Some days I don't feel like going, but I've managed to find a sense of joy and satisfaction and pride in it. So even when it's difficult, I'm not suffering. I'm working towards my goals and my dreams. And that's way more manageable than just being miserable all the time.
Exactly. I just don't think there's any place for misery in somebody's life unless it's an unfortunate circumstance. But, you can choose a path of sacrifice and achieve your greatest dreams. And I don't think that suffering or misery needs to be along there at all. It's just a brain reframe.
And that's a great way to say it. It's like you're going to make a story up about something, make one up that serves you.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen, I can't remember the exact wording of it, but I did see a good Instagram meme of, it's like there's a split picture, and one is an overweight person, a glutton, and it's like the path to hell looks like heaven. And then on the flip side is this person working really hard, but they're in great shape, and the path to heaven looks like hell to some people. And it's kind of like a similar thing to what we're talking about. The person who is fit, they're going to live. In most cases, they're going to live a long life. They're going to have great energy. They're going to have the systems in place that are going to give them back their time. And yes, they're going to have to work for it. That's the result of work, but it's not suffering. On the flip side, the person who's just eating fast food and overeating and drinking and smoking weed and pornography and all that stuff, like they might get instant gratification.
There's another meme, I'm sure you've seen it, where it's this on one side, it's this individual who, like you said, is maybe obese and broken down and drunk and alone and just miserable. And then on the other side, you have this gentleman who's healthy and sober and pursuing passion and married and in a thriving marriage. And on the left side, with the guy who's miserable, it says, "Why are you this way?" And he said, "Well, my dad was a drunk and he was abusive and he was an alcoholic and he never was present." And then on the right-hand side, it says, "Why are you this way?" And that guy says, "Well, my dad was a drunk and he was abusive and he was an alcoholic and he was never present." So and I know this is a made-up story,
well,
but it's probably got some validity. Yeah. Well, it's like, it's the same story.
Yeah.
But it's how you choose to look. If that person was like that, it can compel you to be that same way, or it can compel you to be a different way. But that's a decision that you have to make. You didn't get to choose that circumstance.
Man, what an incredible person. So for people listening who are like, who is this person? Well, so Nick was born with no legs. He has the stumps, and then I believe he just has a stump on one side, and then he has his arm on the right-hand side, and he has one finger, and it's his middle finger. And this guy works out. He has 1 million followers. He's one of the best motivational speakers in the world, and he's just an incredible person. Like he drives like Dodge Chargers and Ford Mustangs, and like has these
he's
custom,
like a bodybuilder. And
I mean, he's living life, and So, the doctors told his parents to abort him. And so, I mean, his parents are, Nick's the hero, but I mean, his parents are the heroes. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine that? But they raised him to be this incredible human being. And it's like, look at the choices that man has made. And I had a mentor who was in a similar position. Did you ever meet Sean Stevenson, the 3-foot giant?
Sure, yeah.
So Sean
I've never met him. I know who he is, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Sean unfortunately passed away because Sean had, this is very inspiring, and he was an amazing speaker, an amazing public speaker. But Sean was born with a disease, some type of bone disease, and he broke his bones 280 times in his life. Like when he was playing as a kid, he would break his femur just playing. And so he only grew to be 3 feet high. But this man became, again, an amazing motivational speaker. He was funny as heck. He got married. Eventually, unfortunately, he fell and hit his head, and because his bones were so fragile that he passed away. But he touched lives, man. Like I hired the guy for a full day of he was a therapist and a counselor and coach, and he really did help me out with a lot of things I needed to get out of my own head about. And again, this is a person who was gifted this situation and decided to make certain decisions. But you wouldn't judge him for being like, no, I'm just going to go play video games and I'm going to hide from the world. Like I wouldn't hold that against him if he decided to make that choice, because that's tough. But instead, he decided to go into that cave that most people fear to enter.
Yeah. it's pretty amazing to see people in those circumstances where they do those things, and then it strips away all of our excuses and almost
Right,
makes
totally.
me at times feel, inadequate. You're like, man, if somebody like that can do that, what am I complaining about? Why? Like I almost, as if I have it too easy, that life has become too easy or convenient, this goes back to the point you were making earlier about things are good, so I don't really have a reason to make them better because they're pretty good.
Well, this is where I have my internal feelings of regret, because I know that so many other people have started out in life with less than me, have started out in harder circumstances, and have done more. And so when people ask me like, hey, what's your motivation to keep on doing stuff? It's have I really done the most with the gifts I've been given? And Ed Milet has this great little story that he teaches on stage where, he believes that when Ed Milet dies and he goes to heaven, he's going to meet God's going to bring out like, this was the best version of Ed Milet that you could have been. And Ed says, I want to make sure that I'm 100% that person. And it's a really, really good visualization. It really gets you thinking, okay, yeah. So, I mean, like, John, who's listening to this, John's like thinking, I could have done better at this. I could be a better leader. Like, I'm capable of doing those things. And so I got to keep going. Because, man, when it's easy to be complacent. And especially if you started from nothing and you got to a place in your life where you have a lot of stuff, it is easy to be complacent. But then you have to actually have to flip the script and say, okay, I've got everything I want, but have all the people around me gotten what they want? And have I given everything that I can give to all the other people out there? No, you'll never, ever give everything you can to all the other people out there. But that's where you have to then put your efforts, because as someone who struggled with anxiety a long time ago, it's because I got caught up in my own head and really thinking about myself. And one of the things when I was going through my anxiety attacks was I found that whenever I helped somebody else, the anxiety completely disappeared. And so I use that all the time as like, whatever bad feeling ever comes into me, I know I can get rid of it just by going out and helping somebody, whether that means answering a question on social media to a complete stranger for like 10 seconds or a minute or two, or writing a post for a website or making a video and sharing it. I'll just get rid of the bad feelings because I'm going out there and helping somebody. And that's what drives me, and that's what should drive us all, because there's always the ability for us to reach another level of our potential with that.
Yeah. Where does the term doom loop come into play? Because that's one thing you talked about in the book too, is, there's the suffering, but then specifically there's this loop that we get into. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so a doom loop is a cycle of bad behavior. And I had a lot of bad cycles of bad behavior. Like for me, binge drinking was my biggest bad behavior that I ever had in my life, that held me back, that I never got out of I should have got out of it way earlier than I did. But it was just this thing that, I'm in the loop. I'm in this, here's my social circle. And what do? They get together on Saturdays and they binge drink. All my friends are here. My environment that I put myself in on weekends is conducive to it. And so I can't get out of this loop. How am I going to get out of this loop? I have to make big changes in my behavior. I need a circuit breaker to get out of the loop. For other men, it might be they go home and they just watch TV, from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. They just watch TV and they eat bad food. Okay, that's a doom loop. Oh, man. And then they're so tired from that the night before that they just go home and they get back in that loop. And we all find ourselves in various bad loops. Some guys are into pornography, some guys are into binge drinking or regular night drinking. There's all types of these doom loops that we get in. And how do you break out of that? You break out of it through what we call the effortless discipline systems. We need to, first of all, eliminate the triggers and temptations and the toxic people that just drag us down into those bad behaviors. And we need to eliminate the distractions. We need to eliminate the cues on our phone that might make us go from, watching some girl's CrossFit video to pornography. Like that, I know guys who just that's their doom loop. That's how they get into that stuff. And so we need to eliminate. And then after elimination comes preparation. We want to make the path to the bad habit as hard as possible, and we want to make the path to the good habit as easy as possible. We want to grease the groove. And how do we do that? It's better planning and preparation than ever before. Anybody who's ever lost weight successfully knows how important better planning is, because maybe you tried 10 times to lose 30 pounds and then finally you did it. What was the difference? Well, that was the time that you finally planned all your workouts and got a coach. That was the time that you finally did all your meal prep or got a meal prep service, that was the time that you actually prepared your meals for the week and got everything in place. And then it finally clicked. And so whatever it is, whatever good habit you want to put into your life, you have to put better planning and preparation to get into it as easy as possible. And then finally, the last one, the effortless discipline systems are EPC, elimination, preparation, and connection. And this is what is missing from most men's lives. This is what you provide through your communities, which is so important, because through connection, we get accountability. So many people wake up on January 1st, set a goal, and keep it to themselves. But you're the easiest person to let down. If you have a community of like-minded people and you stand up in front of that community, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, you say, this is in the next 30 days, I'm going to do this, or this is the year I'm going to accomplish this, or in the next 90 days, I'm going to lose 30 pounds, or I'm going to start my business this year, or I'm going to fix my marriage. When you stand up in front of that group, you've burned the boats because you're a person of integrity, and a person of integrity follows through on their word. And that is the missing link because, again, most men, we just go through and we suffer in silence and we keep everything to ourselves. But that's probably why we're not achieving all that we can. And for me, I mentioned Bedros a couple of times on here. There's the community aspect of the connection, and then there's the individual aspect. And I always say that you want to have accountability to somebody you deeply do not want to disappoint. Accountability to somebody you deeply do not want to disappoint will help you move mountains in life. And for me, years ago, I was that introverted guy. I wanted to be successful. And I had a bunch of coaches, and they helped me a bit, but I felt like I was only doing 80% of what they suggested. And then I hired Bedros as a coach. And when he said something, I didn't do just 100%. I did 110% because I looked up to him as like a big brother. And if you ever disappoint him, you're going to get this Armenian death stare, and you don't want to get the Armenian death stare. So
totally.
But if you find somebody that you look up to, mentor, big brother, and not literal big brother, but like somebody in the community, and you tell them something that you want to achieve something, your mind will just go into this mode where it will make you follow through. And the follow through is what's missing from most people's lives these days. But the follow through is, it's everything.
Yeah. I really like that component. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about, I've seen in Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit, James Clear, Atomic Habits. Yeah, and I think what you're alluding to is the idea of, and you actually talk about this in the book, is the idea of systems. Do you say systems over discipline? That if once you have systems, discipline is not required? Help me flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So everybody, if you close your eyes and you think the word discipline, what do you think? You think of somebody who looks like Ryan, getting out of an ice bath with an axe in his hand and, tattoos all over his chest. Like everybody thinks that somebody who does physically hard tasks, that's what you think of as discipline. Like white knuckling your way through life, like put a piece of chocolate cake in front of me. I've just done a 72-hour fast and I'm just going to stare it down. I'm like, okay, you can only go through life using so much discipline. There's research
it's
that
like
shows
willpower.
Yeah, willpower and discipline are depletable resources. Like when you go and do a workout, you can't work out forever because your muscle energy depletes. You can't, ride through life on like, I'm just going to mentally beat this. It's not going to work forever. What you need are systems. Systems make things relatively easy, simpler at least, and require less mental effort. Because our day to day of like, hey, getting in traffic and, having the discipline not to give the finger to somebody who cut you off, like that depletes your discipline. And so, you don't have this inexhaustible supply of it. But if you have the systems of accountability, like, one of the things, Ryan, that I found over the years of coaching people is that one of the most important keystone habits is people getting to bed on time. Because if you don't get to bed on time, you don't sleep well, and you have a greater chance of hitting snooze. You hit snooze, then you are rushing around and you're late. You over-caffeinate. You have some crappy food at a drive-through. You get caught in traffic because if you would have left 10 after 7, no traffic, but you left at 20 after 7, and now there's traffic. And now you're using this up. And you get to work, and you're snapping at Sally because she did something in the office, and it's just negative domino after negative domino. But if you get to bed on time, you get up on time, you're refreshed, you actually are making the right decisions all day long, and you're knocking down the good dominoes. So if that's the keystone habit, and some people might be going, that can't be that simple. It is that simple. Whenever I see somebody who's in disarray, I'm like, have you been out late? And it's like, oh, I was at a seminar and I stayed up late and I got home and I can't sleep. It almost comes down to that. So you need a system to get to bed on time. And we teach a system in one of our books called the Perfect Week Formula. It's called the reverse alarm. An hour before bed, your system is that if you want to get to bed at 10 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, an alarm goes off on your phone. That's part of the system. And when the alarm goes off, you turn off all your electronics. You shut down your iPhone, on social media, you shut down your laptop, you turn off the TV, whatever else, everything's turned off. And now you can only do what I call old school activities. You can read, you can talk to your wife, you can make your lunch, hang out with your kids, take a bath, take a shower, whatever. You can meditate, you can pray, you can read the Bible. But eventually, after about 40 minutes, you're like, I'm ready to go to bed. I'm tired now. And so you get to bed on time from a system. And you can put systems into place. I'm sure a lot of people have used the system of a workout buddy before because, you have a greater chance of skipping your workout if it's just you. But if somebody's waiting there and is going to bust your balls for not showing up to the workout, you're going to go. That's part of a system. And these things, having a workout buddy is a whole lot more effective as a system than relying on discipline alone. Or making a commitment to the community of, hey guys, I'm going to take 60 days off alcohol. If you say that, you're much more likely to use that system to avoid that beer when you're on a work trip and the flight's delayed and you're in the airport bar and you're like, oh man, if you didn't tell that group and use that system of accountability, you'd probably have the beer. And so everything there in the system world is to make things easier for you. And you can set these up for your nutrition, your Bible study, whatever it is. Everything can be made easier through systems. And those don't deplete your discipline and willpower for sometimes when you need to use that stuff in cases of emergency.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I remember years ago, I did an endurance event. It was called the Spartan-A-Gogi. And it was brutal. 50-hour endurance event on Joe DeSena's property in Vermont, and it was wild. And some incredible athletes there, too, that we were all performing with. But I had Joe DeSena on the podcast, and he had said, oh, you should come do this. And I'm like, cool, yeah, I'll do it. And before I knew what it was, I said, yeah, I'll do the Spartan-A-Gogi, because I had done some other Spartan races. And he's like, cool, here's this person's contact. Give him a call and let him know you can come on me. I'm like, great, I'll do that. And so I looked at it after the podcast. I'm like, oh no, what did I sign up for?
Right, but you've already made the commitment.
I said I would do it, and I try to be a man of my word. And so I went and did it. And I told, at the time we had a 10,000 man Facebook group. So this was years and years ago. And went and did the Spartan-A-Gogi. And there were plenty of times where I was like, I'm done. I can't do this. I'm going to throw in the towel. But I remember, I'm like, no, I told 10,000 men that I would do it. And if I don't do it, then I have to go back to 10,000 people that I care about and want to win, that I didn't have what it takes. And I was, and there were some other motivating factors too, but that was, to me, that was no longer discipline. That was part of a system where I told those guys that I would do it, and I'm not going to face down not doing it. And it helped me in a lot of those moments really get through some difficult times in that event.
Man, accountability is such a life hack. It truly is. And it is, it's got some components of it. It's got to be a community of like-minded people. And you have to, have your integrity. But when you do that, it is a burn the boats moment. So a word of caution, a word of warning is make sure you read the fine print, when you are committing
before
to something.
You start signing up for things. But I think there's something to be said for that too. If you're trying to be a man of your word, if you sign up for something, it's pretty acceptable in modern times, relatively acceptable for you to back out of it. You can come up with all sorts of excuses or reasons or whatever as to why you can't do those things. And most people will be pretty understanding. But my philosophy is that even if you want to get out of it, you actually have to do it, because you have to feel the weight of your words. And if you're miserable for 3 hours doing something you don't want to do, but you committed to doing it, maybe next time you won't be as loose-lipped with your commitments.
Absolutely. You got to learn a lesson one way or another, for sure.
For sure. Yeah. When you talk, you also talk about the last section of the book is really on achieving more in your life. And I think obviously every man who's listening to this podcast wants to achieve more in their life, but you talk about the fastest path. And sometimes I'm not skeptical of what you're saying, but sometimes when we hear things like that, it's we naturally gravitate towards the get rich quick schemes and the programs and the hacks. And it's like, I think there are more effective ways of doing things, but the fastest, to me anyways, isn't always the most effective. Help me understand that.
Yeah, so what we believe is that when you change your identity and have higher standards for yourself, that this is going to help you make the right decisions automatically. And that's what's going to be the killer tool, the killer way for you to be able to achieve what you want. And some of these things are going to happen quite quickly, because when you, like, for example, some people would be really shocked to say that you can quit pornography overnight, right? And we have this story in the book of some guy who does it because he simply raises his standards, because we reframe things in their brain. And reframing things in somebody's brain is a super powerful way to get somebody to make really big quantum leaps. And so we simply, it was a coaching client of mine, and I said, because he knew that I don't watch pornography, and I've talked about it before, and he was like, man, I really struggle with this. And I'm like, hey, no, it's all right. Don't beat yourself up. But just understand that you are an honorable man, you're a family man, and you're just simply the type of man who doesn't do this. And those were the magic words he needed in order to finally flip the switch in his mind and raise his standards. Now, listen, for me, it took me 10 years to stop binge drinking. So I am not an overnight success story in everything. And I was probably too immature to look at the whole standards thing as the quick fix, but it was a quick fix for my friend. And so you need that level of maturity and that level of commitment and that level of understanding your core values. But in certain cases, you can really quit things as long as they're not physical addictions. Obviously, if they're a physical addiction, you may need medical help, and it's a little bit outside the scope of expertise on that. But if it is simply a bad habit, you can kick bad habits to the curb. It doesn't require a 21-day fix or 60 days or whatever it is. In some cases, you can just simply quit that once you say this is out of alignment with who I am as a man. Won't work for everything, but there's a lot of things that it can work for, and you can quit it really, really fast. So for people that are like, well, what do you mean by the standards and identity? The standards are really the rules for your life. And we use this, my co-author is a big fan of NFL football, and Mike Tomlin, the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they're really big on the Steelers organization of standards. Like, they have certain rules for performance and how you act as a Pittsburgh Steeler. And if you don't ingrain them, you're gone. And it's like, this is the filter through which the organization operates. And for our own lives, we need standards through which we use as the filter for how we operate. Because in this day and age, there's so many decisions to make, right? There's so many things we see on social media. There's so many advertisements you see driving down the road in America and watching on TV or listening to the radio. And there's a lot of things that sound interesting, but you have to run everything through a quick filter so that you can then decide whether to give it any of your attention or to just say, sounds interesting, but I cannot do it. And if you're going to think about every decision, you will be eventually emotionally and mentally fatigued trying to consume and process all that information. But if you have simple, no, we just don't do that. Great. Like, for example, my mom has always gone to church every Sunday morning. So if somebody said to her, hey, why don't you come out and go to we're going to go to the play it starts at 12 o'clock. We're going to have to leave here at 10 o'clock in the morning. My mom would say, I'd love to, but I can't. I always go to church. It starts at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. I can't go. So I don't even have to waste any mental energy thinking about whether or not I accept that invitation, because here are my standards and it doesn't fit in my standards. I have a personal standard now that I don't consume alcohol at all anymore. So when I go out to a business event and people are like, hey, you want a drink? If I'm with somebody who's trying not to drink, they're going to do these, mental gymnastics. Oh, I want to have a drink, but I shouldn't have a drink. I got an early flight, but I
Right.
I don't want the peer pressure. Like, it's emotionally exhausting to have that conversation in your head. But I'm like, oh, I'm not the type of person who drinks alcohol, so thank you. Let's talk about something else. Like it
Right.
just is
Easy.
that immediate thing.
Well, and it's such a firm line stance that people begin to they begin to expect it from you.
Sure.
Quite honestly, where it's like, oh yeah, I don't even ask Craig anymore because I know, and it's not a deal. I
Yeah.
think where people begin to get into trouble is, like you said, the mental gymnastics, and when they start compromising. I mean, it would be easy, for example, to compromise to see your mom when you have other things, but if you break down in that area, it becomes easier to break down the next time and the next time and the next time for
And
different
in
reasons
other
that are really
areas.
unimportant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever differentiate between standards and expectations? Because I've found in my own life that I might have an expectation to produce a desired result, for example, but sometimes things are beyond my control and it doesn't work out the way that you want it to. Or I know that I've had a lot of frustration in the past around having expectations of other people.
Yeah.
And so is there room for a differentiation between what a standard and an expectation of yourself would be?
Yeah, totally. And so again, the expectation, if it's an outcome based thing outside of your control, we need to be careful with like incorporating that as a standard. But standard is simply a behavior in which you control. So I fully control whether or not I'm going to consume alcohol. Now, I don't fully control like, hey, I'm going to wake up every morning I'm going to wake up feeling amazing. There's some days
You'd like
I'm not
that,
going to wake up
but-
feeling amazing. That expectation is unrealistic. But it's similar to something that I learned through my study of Stoic philosophy, that we only control our thoughts, words, and our deeds. So our standards really need to be around our thoughts, our words, our deeds, because nothing else is within our control. The results or somebody else's behavior or definitely someone else's performance, not within our control. So we do have to separate those. But the effort that if we're inside an organization, we can have organizational standards that someone has to play up to those. And if they don't, there's going to have to be some correction, or there's going to have to be some leaving of the organization. So we can set them, but they all have to be around the behaviors, and then the outcomes come because of that.
Right. Yeah. I like that. I mean, the outcomes as a result of the standards that you have, not necessarily the other way around. And I like your reframing, because you actually reframed something else when I was going through the book, and you had said, when it comes to your identity, we had talked about that a little bit ago. You had said, who you are is what you do. And I think most people have that backwards, where it's what you do is then becomes who you are. But if you let those things that you do lead, I think what ends up happening is we could run the risk of, well, here's a great example. You see how many law enforcement guys or military members who wrap up their identity so strongly in their line of work that once they're retired or medically disqualified, we see suicide, we see depression, we see anxiety, we see frustration, all because their identity was wrapped up in what they do. They didn't identify their identity first and allow that to dictate everything else around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what we're looking for here is again, it's the right orientation. And the orientation needs to come from more of our core values, and that, listen, the core values that go into the law enforcement and core values that go into, the special forces is, one of justice and one of, effort and honor. And those things, once you leave the position, those things don't leave you. You have left a position, which is, different than the core values that are associated with it. And so again, it's all a matter of orientation and the reframing in your mind of what makes you the man that you are.
When you're doing when you're talking about orientation and vision, because we talked about that too, what do you feel is the most compelling factors? Because we tell a lot of guys, hey, create a vision, cast a vision. I had a question even today where he didn't feel like his vision was good enough. And I gave the recommendation that it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be amazing. Start with what you have, do what you can, start moving towards it, and then let the vision be dynamic. Let it grow and change and morph and evolve over time as you do.
Here's the thing, is that most people, their minds are just not wired for it. So have you ever done the Clifton Strength Finders test?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so the Clifton Strength Finders test is an interesting test. It ranks you on 32 categories of like mental competence stuff, and it gives you your top 5 and your worst 5. I can't remember what my worst five are, but 3 of my top 5 are vision, strategic, and futuristic. And so my brain is wired to think in the future all the time. So you and I are doing this podcast in the first half of the year. I know what I'm doing on December 13th at 3:00 in the afternoon, which is insane to most people, especially my wife. She is the exact opposite of me in this. And so most people are not wired to see the future, see their own future, let alone somebody else's future, but to think in the future. It's just not, honestly, it's not normal. And so it is very difficult for most men. So any man who has a hard time with this, don't beat yourself up, because it's just not a natural thing to you. Some people do think this way, but most people don't. And so what I recommend that you do is you find somebody's YouTube videos. There's lots of people who put out really great planning stuff. Patrick Bet-David has stuff on this. He's one that comes to mind. There's a guy named Cameron Harold who has really great books called Double Double, which is about creating a vision for your life and for your business. I put out a lot of YouTube videos on this. And so there's people like me who kind of train you. Like, some people are not naturally good in the gym, so they go to a personal trainer. Some people are not naturally good at creating a vision or futuristic thinking, so go to somebody who is. And what we do is we have kind of fill in the blank templates that will help you, or we have a list of questions that you've never thought about because they're not natural for you, so that you can start to paint a clear picture of where you want to get to. I use the analogy of like when we were kids. Whenever you're a kid, somewhere or another, whether it was a TV show or a comic book, you saw somebody with a treasure map. And that's what the vision is for your future. You need to find out where X is on your treasure map. And then when you've done that, when you've identified the vision, then you can start putting the little dotted lines, that get you to the treasure map, which is your straight line for success. So you need to have that, and you need some cues and some coaching on how to do it. But like you said, get the first thing out of your mind, and then review it regularly every couple of months, and seek out resources that will make you better at creating it.
Yeah, it's powerful. Well, Craig, I really appreciate this conversation. You've got the new book, The Dark Side of Discipline, and I haven't read the entire book, but I've gone through a lot of it over the weekend. You sent it over to me, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation. Will you let the guys know where to connect with you, learn more about the book, pick up a copy, of course, and find out more?
Yeah, we'd love to just for everybody grab a book on Amazon. So we have the hard copy, we have the audiobook. Audiobook's hard work. So if you get the audiobook, I really appreciate it.
It is hard work.
It
I can attest to that.
Like imagine having to say every sentence perfectly. And
yes. And then your editors come back and they're like, redo this. You messed up this word or mispronounced this word or that word. It's
right.
challenging.
I wrote my book. And I read it out loud so that when I go to the studio, I'm not going to have these tongue twisters. So anyways, I appreciate all the book sales. And then anybody can follow up with me on Instagram. I answer all my DMs. I love chatting about fatherhood. I love chatting about, systems. I love chatting about time management. I'm super fanatical about that. And also, the videos about creating your vision. I'd love to share those with anybody.
Excellent. We're going to sync everything up. Guys, go check it out. Some great work. I've been a longtime friend and fan of what you do. So thanks for joining me today, brother.
Thank you.